Welcome to Wisdom of the Bible channel. David was once the forgotten shepherd boy, yet he rose to be Israel's greatest king. Now we turn our attention to his son, a man born in a palace and raised in luxury, handed every privilege, yet bound to lose it all. This is the story of Solomon, the third king of Israel, who built the greatest empire in Israel's history, but also ended his life as a warning to future generations. He was celebrated as the wisest king who ever lived, yet he made some of the most reckless decisions imaginable. How can both claims be true? His reign started with power, prosperity, and a rare gift of wisdom directly from God. He ushered in an era marked by gold, peace, and astonishing success for the kingdom. But something went very wrong. His craving for power, his fascination with riches, and his passion for foreign women eventually led him to devastation. The central question remains: was Solomon Israel's greatest monarch, or was he its greatest tragedy? Solomon's story did not begin in triumph. It began in scandal, long before he was born, before he ever took up a royal scepter, before anyone spoke of his throne. His parents, King David and Bathsheba, had been caught in one of Israel's most shocking events, a tale involving forbidden desire, sorrow, and death. David had been known as a righteous king, a man after God's own heart, but he stumbled. One evening he saw Bathsheba bathing on a rooftop. Instead of looking away, he pursued her and took what did not belong to him. Bathsheba was no ordinary woman. She was the wife of Uriah, a devoted soldier in David's army. When Bathsheba found she was pregnant, David panicked. He tried to cover his wrongdoing by calling Uriah home from the battlefield, hoping he would spend the night with his wife and assume the child was his. But Uriah, loyal to his comrades, refused to enjoy home comforts while his fellow soldiers still fought. David then sank deeper into sin. He arranged for Uriah to be sent to the front lines, commanding the other men to pull back so Uriah would be killed in the clash. Though disguised as the fortunes of war, it was calculated murder. Once Uriah was dead, David took Bathsheba as his own wife, but God saw it all. The prophet Nathan arrived with a harsh message. He told David, "You are the man," 2 Samuel 12:7. Nathan exposed everything, proclaiming that the child conceived in sin would die. Bathsheba grieved, David grieved, and judgment came to pass. The child died, just as the prophet declared. Yet in the midst of this judgment, God's mercy also emerged. Bathsheba conceived again, and this time the child survived. His name was Solomon. Unlike the first child, whose death signaled judgment, Solomon was seen as a token of God's grace and promise. But why was this particular son chosen to be king out of all David's children? David had many sons. By human custom, the oldest son usually inherited the throne. That would have been Amnon, David's firstborn. But Amnon committed a monstrous sin against his own sister, and God rejected him. David's next son, Absalom, was dashing, influential, and bold. He even led a rebellion against David, trying to seize the throne by force. Yet Absalom's pride ended in his downfall, and he too perished. One by one, David's elder sons were disqualified by their wickedness or their treachery. Finally, it became evident that Solomon was God's choice. He was neither the mightiest nor the eldest, but God had set him apart. Nathan the prophet, the same man who had once condemned David's sin, now played a part in confirming Solomon's destiny. As David aged, his strength fading, yet another son, Adonijah, boldly declared himself king. He gathered military leaders, influential priests, and important people to support his premature coronation. Nathan and Bathsheba acted swiftly. They went before David and reminded him of God's promise that Solomon was the true heir. Though feeble, David decisively commanded Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the warrior to anoint Solomon and place him on the throne without delay. So, while Adonijah threw a self-congratulatory feast, Solomon was crowned by David's direct order. Adonijah heard the uproar, the trumpets blasting, the city cheering, "Long live King Solomon," and realized his plan had collapsed. Frightened, he fled to the altar of God, grasping its horns in a plea for mercy. Solomon spared Adonijah's life on the condition that he remain loyal. Adonijah submitted, at least for a time. Still, the throne was not yet secure, and Solomon's saga of power and wisdom was only beginning. David was near his end. For decades he had reigned over Israel, conquering enemies and expanding the nation. Now, on his deathbed, he summoned Solomon to impart final words as both father and king. "I am about to go the way of all the earth, so be strong, show yourself a man, and walk in obedience to the Lord your God." 1 Kings 2:2-3. But David also mentioned old enemies who had caused him great pain, warning Solomon to deal wisely with them. He named Joab, the cunning general who had shed innocent blood, and Shimei, who had cursed David in his darkest hour. David passed away, concluding an era of legendary triumph and bitter mistakes. With David gone, Solomon began to assert his authority. Though he had shown mercy to Adonijah earlier, Adonijah soon schemed again, and this time Solomon would not spare him. Adonijah requested to marry Abishag, the young woman who cared for David in his final days. In that culture, taking a former king's concubine implied a claim on the throne. Solomon immediately recognized the threat, and Adonijah was executed on the king's command. Joab also faced the consequences of his own deeds. He had murdered rivals, including Abner and Amasa, and had supported Adonijah's rebellion. Sensing doom, Joab ran to the altar and clutched its horns, but Solomon gave the order to strike him down there, ending Joab's bloody legacy. Shimei was given strict instructions: live in Jerusalem and never leave the city, or you will die. For 3 years he obeyed, but when he finally crossed the boundary, Solomon enforced the sentence. With Adonijah, Joab, and Shimei gone, Solomon's throne was no longer under immediate threat. He had proven his ability to wield power firmly. Now came the real test. Would he govern with the wisdom needed to guide Israel to lasting greatness, or would he let power distort his judgment? Solomon knew that brute strength would not be enough to rule effectively. He needed insight and the ability to discern between right and wrong. So he went to Gibeon to offer a colossal sacrifice, 1,000 burnt offerings, a remarkable act of worship and devotion. That night God appeared to Solomon in a dream, saying, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." 1 Kings 3:5. Faced with the chance to request anything, riches, long life, victory over enemies, Solomon humbly asked for wisdom. He admitted, "I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Give your servant a discerning heart." 1 Kings 3:7-9. This request pleased God. Not only did God grant Solomon unparalleled wisdom, but he also promised wealth and honor, blessings Solomon had not sought. It was a moment that would define the king's future and Israel's destiny. Proof of Solomon's wisdom came quickly. 2 women, each claiming to be the mother of a single baby boy, brought their dispute before him. One child had died overnight, and in the darkness, the grieving mother had switched the lifeless infant with the living one. With no witnesses to confirm their stories, everyone assumed the case was unsolvable. But Solomon ordered a sword and said, "Cut the living child in 2. Horrified, the real mother begged for the child's life, willing to give him up to save him, while the other woman showed no compassion. Solomon instantly saw who the true mother was. "Give the baby to her," he declared. "She is his mother." Word of this astonishing verdict spread throughout Israel and beyond, confirming that God had blessed Solomon with unique understanding. Israel entered a golden era. No longer was it struggling to fend off invaders or unify its tribes. Under Solomon, it flourished, becoming the wealthiest and most powerful kingdom of its time. He achieved this not by waging wars, but through strategic alliances, skillful diplomacy, and trade. King Saul's rule had been plagued by conflict with the Philistines. King David expanded Israel's borders through military victories. Solomon, though, turned Israel into a commercial powerhouse, forging friendships with nearby nations to ensure peace and prosperity. Solomon realized war drained resources and cost lives, so he chose a path of negotiation and partnership, marrying princesses from Egypt, Moab, Ammon, Sidon, and other territories. These marriages cemented alliances, making it undesirable for those nations to attack Israel and opening trade routes across the region. Traders from distant lands flocked to Israel. Caravans brought gold, silver, spices, and exotic animals. The kingdom became a key crossroads, channeling goods between Africa, Asia, and Europe. Solomon also built a formidable navy with help from Phoenician experts. His ships sailed to far-off lands, some believe as far as India, returning laden with treasures, gold, ivory, rare wood, apes, and peacocks. All this bounty flowed into Israel's treasuries, elevating it from a small Middle Eastern kingdom to a global economic power. With seemingly endless wealth, Solomon embarked on vast building projects. He constructed entire cities and fortified them with walls, watchtowers, and gates. He developed roads and trading centers, turning Israel into a modern state admired by all who visited. Among Solomon's most significant works was the Temple of the Lord. For centuries, Israel had worshipped in a mobile tabernacle dating back to the wilderness days under Moses. David had longed to build a permanent place for God's presence, but had been told his son would do it instead. Solomon embraced the vision. He gathered the best materials, cedar and cypress from Lebanon, precious stones precisely cut at quarries, and tons of gold from Ophir. He employed legions of workers, tens of thousands, over many years to complete this sacred structure. The temple itself was not enormous by modern standards, about 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high, 1 Kings 6.2. But its splendor was matchless. Every inch of the interior, from floor to ceiling, was overlaid with pure gold. The most holy place housed 2 giant cherubim, each 15 feet tall, overshadowing the Ark of the Covenant. Intricate carvings, pomegranates, palm trees, and floral motifs adorned the walls, also plated in gold. 10 golden lampstands, 10 golden tables and golden bowls sparkled in the lamplight. Even the doorways were gilded, reflecting a dazzling glow. When the temple was finished, Solomon brought the elders and priests together. They carried the Ark of the Covenant into the most holy place while the crowd watched in hushed expectation. Then, when the priests withdrew, the cloud filled the temple, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple. 1 Kings 8:10-11. Priests could not stand to minister because of this overwhelming presence. Solomon knelt in prayer before all the people, saying, "Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens cannot contain you. How much less this temple?" 1 Kings 8:23-27. He asked that whenever people prayed toward the temple, God would hear from heaven. Fire then descended and consumed the sacrifices. 2 Chronicles 7:1. The people fell on their faces, filled with awe and wonder. God later appeared to Solomon at night, reaffirming his promise to listen if Israel turned to him, but warning that should they forsake him, the temple would become a ruin. Word spread throughout the ancient world of Solomon's unprecedented wisdom, wealth, and achievements. Among the dignitaries who heard these reports was the Queen of Sheba, a powerful ruler of a wealthy kingdom believed to be in modern-day Ethiopia or Yemen. Skeptical of the rumors, she decided to see for herself if Solomon's legend was real or overblown. She organized a huge caravan, loaded with treasures, gold, spices, precious stones, and more. Accompanied by her officials and servants, she traveled a great distance through dangerous deserts and hostile territories. Her goal was to confront Solomon with difficult questions to test the limits of his intellect. When she finally arrived in Jerusalem, she was overwhelmed by what she saw. The city bustled with trade and sophistication. Solomon's palace, gleaming with gold and ivory, stood as a masterpiece of engineering and artistry. Upon meeting Solomon, she posed her riddles and complex queries. To her astonishment, he answered every challenge effortlessly, demonstrating knowledge that seemed almost supernatural. She also observed the sumptuous banquets, the organization of Solomon's court, and the abundance of precious metals everywhere. In awe, she said, "I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard." She praised the God of Israel for placing Solomon on the throne. As a gesture of respect, the Queen of Sheba offered lavish gifts to Solomon. He in turn gave her even more, a sign of his kingdom's vast riches. She departed, convinced that all she had heard, and more, was true, and that Israel's God was unlike any other. This royal visit was a highlight of Solomon's reign, but also a hint of what could go wrong in times of great prosperity. Even the Queen of Sheba recognized that Solomon's wisdom and fortune were rooted in divine favor, not mere human achievement. Yet success can breed complacency, and Solomon was nearing a dangerous turning point. Solomon had everything: unimaginable wealth, global admiration, and a kingdom at peace. But even the wisest person can fall. The seeds of his downfall were sown in the practices he used to secure his kingdom, namely, his many foreign marriages. Though these unions solidified alliances, they also introduced foreign gods into Israel. In ancient times, marriages were often strategic. By marrying a princess of a neighboring land, a king formed a political and trade partnership. Solomon excelled at this strategy, marrying women from many nations, 700 wives of royal birth, plus 300 concubines. Yet with these women came their native religions. God had clearly commanded Israel's kings not to multiply wives, especially foreign wives who served other gods, lest they corrupt the king's heart. Despite his legendary wisdom, Solomon believed he could handle it. At first, it may have seemed harmless. Solomon kept worshiping Yahweh, making sacrifices at the temple he had built. But gradually, to please his wives, he allowed altars to spring up around Jerusalem for their deities: Chemosh of Moab, Moloch of Ammon, Ashtoreth of Sidon, and others. In time, Solomon himself participated in these pagan rites. He offered incense and sacrifices on these high places, acts strictly forbidden for those who followed the God of Israel. No matter how wise he was slipping into idolatry. God had warned that you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. 1 Kings 11:2. Solomon disregarded that warning. This slow drift led to a turning away from the very God who had blessed him so richly. The tragedy was that Solomon, who once wrote, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," ended up embracing false gods. He thought these political marriages made his throne unshakable, but they actually undermined the covenant that bound Israel to God. The nation's fate was tied to the king's faithfulness. Finally, God spoke to Solomon one last time with a dire pronouncement. "Since this is your attitude, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." 1 Kings 11:11. However, for the sake of David, God would not do so in Solomon's lifetime, but in his son's reign. Solomon's decline started slowly. Though he remained on the throne, the blessings that had once showered him began to dry up. Adversaries arose from neighboring lands, and internal discontent grew. One of the key figures was Jeroboam, a bright leader whom Solomon had placed in charge of labor forces. One day, the prophet Ahijah approached Jeroboam on a road outside Jerusalem. Ahijah tore a new cloak into 12 pieces, giving Jeroboam 10. "I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand," he declared, "and give you 10 tribes." 1 Kings 11:31. Jeroboam fled to Egypt for a time, waiting for the right moment. The split of the kingdom was inevitable, for Solomon's compromise had triggered God's judgment. When Solomon died after 40 years of rule, his impressive empire was about to unravel. Solomon's downfall is a classic example of how temptation can gradually erode even the strongest foundation. He began as a devoted servant of God but ended up bowing to idols. He had tremendous wisdom but failed to heed the very principles he had taught others. This is not just a story from antiquity. It warns us that no amount of wisdom, wealth, or fame can shield us from the destructive power of sin if we abandon God. Solomon's achievements were overshadowed by his ultimate disobedience. In his later years, Solomon reflected on his life with deep regret. We have a glimpse of his anguish in the book of Ecclesiastes, which many believe he wrote near the end of his reign. "Meaningless, meaningless," he laments. "Everything is meaningless." Ecclesiastes 1:2. This is the voice of a man who tasted all the pleasures of the world, gold, power, knowledge, and romance, yet found it all hollow without God. "I denied myself nothing my eyes desired," he writes, "yet when I surveyed all, everything was meaningless." Ecclesiastes 2:10-11. This echoes the emptiness Solomon felt after straying from the path of righteousness. He once penned Proverbs, offering moral guidance and practical wisdom. "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." Proverbs 1:7. Yet he violated his own advice, setting up idols and drifting away from the devotion he once had. Solomon also wrote the Song of Solomon, a passionate portrayal of love, possibly symbolizing God's bond with his people. But the man who celebrated pure love ended up with 1,000 women, many of whom drew him away from true worship. His own life stood in stark contrast to the ideal love he described. In the final verses of Ecclesiastes, Solomon concludes, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man, for God will bring every deed into judgment." Ecclesiastes 12:13-14. Here he seems to acknowledge his mistakes, recognizing that all achievements are pointless without faithfulness to God. When Solomon died, his son Rehoboam took the throne, but his rule began under a cloud of civil unrest. As the people demanded lower taxes and lighter burdens, Solomon's grand projects had cost enormous sums, and the people were exhausted. Rehoboam faced a critical leadership test. Would he lighten their load or tighten his grip? Rejecting wise counsel, he chose to be even harsher than Solomon, boasting that he would scourge them with whips. This unwise response drove 10 of Israel's 12 tribes to break away under Jeroboam, leaving Rehoboam only the tribe of Judah and part of Benjamin. Thus, the unified kingdom that David and Solomon had built splintered almost overnight. The golden age of Israel ended not long after Solomon's passing. His glorious empire turned into two weaker states, the northern kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam and the southern kingdom of Judah under Rehoboam. Solomon's story serves as both an inspiration and a caution. He was the king who inherited extraordinary blessings from God, yet wasted them through unwise alliances and idolatry. His early brilliance, writing proverbs, building the temple, administering a vast kingdom, was overshadowed by his tragic end. For centuries, the name Solomon has evoked images of boundless wisdom and dazzling riches. He left behind writings that still influence countless lives today, but he also left a broken kingdom as his legacy, cautioning all who rise to prominence that a fall can come from within. He teaches us that no one is immune to moral compromise, and that knowledge alone is not enough. We must also walk humbly before God, obeying his commands even when life seems smooth. Solomon's downfall happened gradually, one small concession at a time, until he had turned almost completely away from the God he once served. His life reminds us that how we finish is as crucial as how we begin. He started his reign by seeking wisdom above all else, impressing the world with his keen judgments and grand designs. Yet he finished it feeling empty, chasing after gods who could not save him or his kingdom. Let Solomon's rise and fall challenge us to guard our hearts. We can have immense gifts, vast resources, and brilliant minds, yet still fall into ruin if we ignore our relationship with God. His concluding reflection, "Fear God and keep his commandments," remains a timeless truth. Solomon is a figure who shows what can happen when blessing and opportunity meet human weakness. He had every reason to remain faithful and every advantage to succeed, yet he threw it away for temporary pleasures and diplomatic ties. May his example urge us to stay anchored in genuine devotion, so that wisdom is not just known but also lived.
Hello, dear viewers. Thank you for watching our channel, Wisdom of the Bible. I personally invite you to subscribe to our channel. It supports us and helps us create more videos. Thank you, and God bless you.